My name is Michael Needham, Mike Needham, and I was born in November 1930. I came into the Marine Corps in 1950. I had dropped out of school for a while, and I knew the draft was going to be coming after me, so I thought I might try something else. And I went and signed up in the Naval Aviation Cadet Program. Went to Pensacola, Florida. About the first 10 or 11 years, I flew in fighters. Then I went over on a second overseas tour to Iwakuni and worked in the airfield operations office. And toward the end of that tour, much to my surprise, I got selected for helicopter transition. And I had the typical fighter pilot attitude, how can this be happening to me? But as it turned out, it was the best thing that ever happened to me in the Marine Corps, because I went on to some just great assignments and met great people, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. By a stroke of luck, I was a pretty newly minted major then, was given command of 364. I relieved Dad Watson, who was going over to 164, I think, to get ready to take the first 46 Squadron to Vietnam. I was commanding officer for about 2 months when Mag 36 got the word that this was in the spring of 65, summer 65, and the big buildup in Vietnam was happening, and the whole group was going over. And the group commander called me in and said, we're bringing the squadron up to strength now. That means there's going to be you're going to be relieved by a lieutenant colonel to command the squadron. And I was relieved by Lieutenant Colonel Bill Lucas. And the rest of that month or so, we got ready to go. And we went out to Vietnam in the summer of 1965 with all of Mag 36 on the Princeton. On the transit, we had the entire group, I guess, three H-34 squadrons, I think, the HR-2Ss, the old venerable H-37s, the small squadron, and I think we had 4 Army helicopters that were just being ferried over to Saigon. The carrier stopped for a few hours in Pearl Harbor, and no one got off except the group commander and a couple of the staff. Went up to FMFPAC to get briefed, and when they came back and we sailed, one of the things Colonel Johnson, the group commander, said that he'd been told up at FMFPAC was we had to be prepared for an opposed landing in Vietnam, and didn't hear any more about that. But when we got out there, we landed at Chu Lai, near Chu Lai, and I could see the MAX 4 had the radar going up on a ridge line, so I didn't think it could be too much of an opposed landing, and it wasn't. One thing that always sticks in my mind about that first day, I went ashore and was looking around for where the tent was going to be in the late afternoon, and I was walking up this hill, Sandy Hill, just off the beach, and there was a mail clerk sitting on a mound of sand there with that big orange bag that mail clerks have. And I don't know why I did. I said, do you have any mail there for Major Needham at 364? And he went digging in there, and he found 4 letters from my wife. The squadron was was manned, as far as the pilots were concerned, with marginally prepared pilots out of the training command, because we had, I think the extreme case I can remember was one of our second lieutenants, who will be nameless, it was no fault of his. He had something like 7 or 8 flights from the training command when we had to stop flying to pack up to go. And we had a lot of, we had more experience than that in the squadron, but I'd say that the biggest problem we had was that we went with at least on the officer side, with marginally prepared pilots. Now, very soon after we got there, the Marine Corps had to run what we call the mix master, because otherwise everybody's tour, that went out there in Mag 36 would be expiring at the same time. So they did bring in a lot of people from other squadrons who had 5, 6, 7 months left on their tours, and move some of our people out and just spread the wealth as far as rotation tour days were going to be concerned. The living conditions, we started from zero, really. I remember the first night we put up, I slept in a pyramidal tent for a little while, and we had, I had a piece of AM2 matting that was lying around that served on the ground as a cot with a sleeping bag on it, and this went on for a little while. However, we had a group commander, Colonel William Gentry Johnson, who was determined that this was going to be a going concern, and it wasn't terribly long before we had strong back tents, and most of us were in general purpose tents erected over lumber. The Northeast monsoon, which affects that part of Vietnam in the fall, started in earnest, and after a month or so of that, it finally dawned on you that you weren't, no matter what you did, you weren't going to be dry. So that was that's something I'll always remember. The weather between about September and Christmas in 1965. We started flight operations almost immediately, and most of it was in support of the 1st Marine Division had elements down to 7th Marines, principally in our area, and I think the 5th Marines, 7th Marines for sure, 3 battalions of the 7th Marines, and a good bit of work with the ARVN, with the South Vietnamese Army. The typical missions were, the first ones that come to mind were troop inserts and retractions with Marines, U.S. Marines. And the ones I remember from early in the tour were principally from the 7th Marine Regiment. First of all, we'd take on a light fuel load in the H-34, and we would carry maybe 5 combat-loaded Marines. It would be all we could carry. If it were ARVN, there was probably no limit. The soldiers were smaller people, and they were lightly equipped. And you could carry, 9 or 10 or as many as you could fit in the H-34. Ordinarily, the troop inserts would be accompanied. There'd be a preparation of the landing zone with A4s typically, and armed Hueys, and most of them went without incident, although sometimes there'd be ground fire. The medevac mission was handled by VMO-6 with Hueys. Occasionally, there'd be a troop lift involving ARVNs themselves, along with an American advisor. And speaking of advisors, reminds me of one incident that happened to me. One time we were resupplying an ARVN outpost. We would frequently take generally big bags of rice out to these observation posts and fire support bases the ARVN had. And I went to one of these, and we landed. They were unloaded and stuff, and an advisor came running out. I took to be a soldier, and he didn't. He was blind. He didn't have a cover on, and he ran down. He was talking to the crew chief, and this went on and on and on. They were talking down there. I couldn't hear what was going on, and I finally said to the crew chief, "What's going on down there? What's that guy? What does he want? What's he saying?" And the crew chief said, "Major, I don't know what he's saying. He's Australian." Occasionally, we would deploy to a major kind of an operation. I remember one called Double Eagle that was down south of Chulai, and there'd be a camp set up, a forward base where we'd be staged during the day and be back and forth at nighttime. And this might involve an operation with supporting a whole battalion or more of Marines or occasionally of Army. On one of them, one time I was down there flying around during the day on various support missions, and came back to Keha late in the afternoon, and found out that 2 or 3 people of the guys said, "We heard you'd been killed today down there." And I said, "No, I hadn't. We hadn't even taken any fire." And I remember the CO, was Colonel Dan Somerville by that time, said to me, "Have you written home?" He said, "You better write home tonight, because that rumor will be in Santa Ana within 4 days." And I think he was right. Another thing, speaking of Colonel William Gentry Johnson, reminds me that he had a absolute determination about security, and there were no Vietnamese allowed into our camp at all for any reason. So we ended up cutting our own hair, cutting each other's hair, things like that. No, there was no laundry service, no barbers, no anything like that. And on the other hand, so we never got. There was never any problem with any incursion. At the same time, down in Mag 12, down the road, not very far, one night early in the tour, several of them got in there. They threw charges up the tailpipes of some A4s, and there were some Vietnamese killed that night right on the flight line, and so maybe it paid off. I remember my hairstylist was Second Lieutenant Bryce Ludke, and I don't know whether Bryce is, but if Bryce is still out there somewhere and happens to see this video, you did just as good a job as what you see right now, Bryce. Sometimes we're asked about what sticks out in your mind as a worst day or a bad day that happened out there. There weren't any really bad days, I don't think. Or there were a lot of them, depending on how you want to look at it. One that sticks in my mind was early in the tour. I think it was during October. We were on one of these missions with the 7th Marines, I think the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, retracting a bunch of them who'd been out in on a mission, maybe 12 miles southwest of where we were. And I was leading the mission, and we loaded troops. I think it was the first or second trip back, and just coming out of the zone, we started taking fire. And this was an area, where the Marines had been in there, right in there for several days. We started taking fire, and the crew chief later on told me that he saw a Vietnamese come out of a hoot, come out of a house, and with a weapon, and shooting at the helicopter. We hadn't gained much altitude yet, just climbing out, and he couldn't get his M60 to bear down on the shooter. Although he said later on that the crew chief or gunner and the bird right behind us shot him. Within a minute or two, the crew chief said, the engine's smoking, and I think we're on fire. And the H-34 had a reputation, it was built mainly of magnesium, and if it started burning, it was going to burn quickly and completely. So we were over some wet rice paddies with a load of Marines in back, 7 or 8 Marines by this time, and so I landed, and it was a wet rice paddy. I landed the plane, the helicopter, and the Marines that were in the helicopter set up a little perimeter around it. By this time, we were perhaps within 8 or 10 miles of Keha. and the rest of them went back and reported what had happened. It turned out the helicopter wasn't on fire, but they had the main oil line. There was an oil cooler on the bottom of the engine on the H-34, right on the bottom of the helicopter, like a car radiator, and either the supply hose or the return hose in the radiator had been shot. Now we put in the only armor plate that this thing would carry was a piece of armor plate to protect that oil cooler, and this was a 30 caliber round that had gone through that armor plate like it was butter, and severed the oil line. So the smoke was from the engine was losing all the oil, and it was just from the oil bubbling and burning around the hot engine. And there's a question about whether, in my mind now looking back, whether the helicopter might have been on the way to seizing up anyway. But within 15 or 20 minutes, there was another helicopter out with maintenance personnel, and we went home without further incident. That happened early in the tour. It got my attention. It was the first time that it wasn't the first time I'd seen fire, but it was the first time I'd been on a helicopter that was hit. First of, I think, 7 times during the tour that I was in a helicopter that was hit. And it was none the worse for wear, but I remember the day very well. I was speaking of another day that sticks in my memory very clearly was later in the tour. This was in July of 1966. Toward the end of, we've been there almost a year now, and we had an early morning recon insert on a hill up near Tam Key, which was 12 or 15 miles northwest of Keyha. And we went down, we picked the Marines up down at Chulai, and I think there were perhaps 3 or 4 planes in the mission. So the recon team was maybe 15 or 18 Marines. And it was one of these first light things, and it was still pretty dark when we picked them up. Anyway, we went up to the hill where they were going to be inserted, and I landed first. We were going in there one plane at a time on this hilltop, and I observed the troops disembarking, and just as they were, the last one was going out, there was this big explosion out there, and I thought it was either a mortar round or a mine or booby trap. There was a big explosion, and I took off. The other planes were still circling, and I started back. The last Marine who had disembarked was blown back into the helicopter. I had something had hit my right leg behind the knee, and a little bit of a trickle of blood was coming down from my right eye. And later it turned out that there was a piece of this shrapnel had just grazed my eyebrow. It didn't even need a stitch, but it was like you'd cut it with a fingernail or something like that. Anyway, we went back, and they said the crew chief was wounded. I had this minor wound. The crew chief had minor wounds, and we landed at BMed. The medical company was there, right adjacent to South Mat, and the Marine who'd been blown back into the helicopter, they came and got him out. And make a long story short, the plane, the maintenance folks told me later on that the plane had about 200 holes in it when they stopped counting, and it went out of there on a barge sometime later on. I never thought that thing would fly again. I think I've said this before at our reunions, and I've heard that other 364 alumni have said the same thing. Now, that I'm going to say about 364. I spent over 31 years in uniform, and perhaps it's because I was 35 years old before I got to hear a shot fired in anger, and perhaps it's because it was my first tour in combat. But I'd say in that whole time that the high point of those 31 years was the 18 months I spent in 364, most of it in Vietnam. And I have to search around for bad days. There were plenty of good days. Most of them were good days. And to all of you, I want to thank my family when they see this for putting up with all of it for the years they did. And to all you Marines, I just want to say, Semper Fi.